not fun. So.
Wow.
So
He
what
may go
happened?
back
The
to
bus got
driver's school
flooded?
before you give him another bus.
What happened? Did a bus drive through the high water?
No, he pulled up our driveway and the rear end hit the asphalt. When he got up the driveway, takes his rear wheels, the driver wheels off the ground. He just sits there with his wheels spinning.
Oh my goodness.
Wally, that's happened before though with,
Oh yes, it's the bane of any big long-tail delivery truck because they don't know to quarter it. Can't hit it straight up. You got to hit it this way to get up. If they hit it straight up, the tail end gets down here and hits the asphalt. That's it. They're done.
while we're waiting for, I know everybody was running a bit late, but let me ask you, Amber, if I remember right, just for Wally's deal, TxDOT delayed us another couple years, didn't they?
They did. Yeah, it's unfortunate.
I may not live long enough to see the widening.
We hope so. Wally, you remember one of the reasons we were able to get that first section of BK's Road done was that we had property owners calling TxDOT complaining.
Yep.
And that was very successful because they paid attention as much to the property owners. But that was because that road is so unsafe. That first section of BK's was so unsafe on that. We were delayed on section 2, which is where you are, because the section 2 went from where we stopped to Walsh Tarleton. And that went into the city of Austin's jurisdiction between Rollingwood Drive and Walsh Tarleton. And they wouldn't adjust we couldn't get TxDOT to adjust the sections. So at that time, Austin wasn't interested in participating in the roadway. And it also went into Westlake slightly. And Westlake wasn't ready at that time either. But that's why we got delayed. When we actually got the money for BK's Road, supposedly there was sufficient funds to do BK's Road from Mopac to 360. So,
Well, they got most of that done except for our little section.
yeah, and we're still in that little section that requires well, TxDOT's going to ultimately do it, but they ultimately do. I understand they claim that they're just out of money right now, but maybe when they're going to start, I think there's a bill that charges electric vehicles a fee that will go to the highway fund. So maybe they can use that money to fix BK's Road since we have a lot of electric vehicles coming through. Why don't we go ahead and get started? I know Ryan's planning on being here. He's running a bit late. So why don't we get started? And if you would, Ashley, if you don't mind, would you call the roll call, please?
Sure. Brooke Brown,
Present.
Drew Flyhive. He is here. Chair Tom Farrell,
Here.
Wally Grainer,
Here.
Ronald Hasso,
Here.
Meredith Knight,
Here.
and David Smith.
Here.
Oh, and Jeff Green. You were here as well. Okay.
Okay, great. Okay, any public comments we have? I see we have a couple people from the public here. If anybody would like to make any comments, now's the time, or you can comment on each item as we go through. So on our minutes, and I'm going to table these for right now, and we'll come back to them if we have time, because we've got a couple things to go through. And without objection, we'll just table those. Item number 5 is our working session with the Bee Cave Road Subcommittee, including discussion on front, rear, and side setbacks, green belts, impervious cover, height restrictions, and other concerns on individual properties. And David, do you want to try to start this off? And I think where we left was we looked at this, and one of the things people wanted to, some of our members wanted to consider was the amount of land after the 100-year floodplain. And I think we have, I was able to pull up some floodplain maps, and I think I just noticed that Carrie sent us a floodplain map also. Mine is a little bit different than hers, but I think mine's a little more detailed. So why don't we open this discussion, because this is where we left it last time, if you don't mind, David. And you had a great map that would kind of address these properties on the floodplain first, and then we'll kind of go from there, if you don't mind.
Well, but my map was really more of a, it was actually a KMZ layer on Google Earth. So I was able to pull it up and take a look at it and kind of move it around and whatnot. So did Tom, did you say someone circulated a better map?
It wasn't as detailed. It was just a general map.
Okay.
I pulled up the FEMA floodplain maps and kind of overlaid the lots on them. And that's the only way I could tell. I couldn't open the map that you'd sent. But
that floodplain map that I just got from Carrie and sent to you, do you want me to send that out to the strike force right now? I only sent it to you. I wasn't sure.
oh, I'm sorry. Yes, go ahead and send it, and
Okay.
we'll kind of just start our discussion on this. David, my maps show that the floodplain goes up to about the 570 elevation. Is that about what yours show?
I'm actually not looking at elevations on what I'm looking at, because it's not showing it per se. It just shows on the Google Earth layers. It just shows the overlay of the floodplain.
Well, let's start this discussion, if you don't mind. Let's start with where it crosses Bee Caves Road and goes on the north side of Bee Caves Road. And I can kind of give everybody what I see is coming up on this. It shows, Wally, on your track, it shows that there is an area that is in the floodplain.
Yes,
Where your parking lot is.
that's correct.
that.
It's the far east end of my parking lot, east and north end of the parking lot.
And from a development standpoint, you'd have to address that, but it's not a significant portion of your property that I can see on that. And then on the finish line, I don't show any of the finish line lot that is in the floodplain.
Of the
I don't know how
lot,
they would be, I don't know how they would be out with me in, and they're right across the creek from me.
It is, but they've got, on the floodplain map, it shows they have a little bit of elevation difference. Yours is not that much in the floodplain. I mean, literally a foot that would be on that. And I'm just looking at the map I have that shows that. And it, from a elevation standpoint, they show that they have built theirs up a little bit. It didn't take much to get it out of the floodplain.
hey,
You could also,
Tom, is that on the finish line's legal lot, or is that just on their limits of development?
I am showing it to be on their development side that they have that. Now they've got some of their back property, Wally. They go back to the center line of the creek. So that part of it, yes, David, glad you brought that up. It's just their development part of it that they have on there.
Yeah.
And they actually delineated theirs a little bit different in that they show two lots, one being the floodplain lot and one being the legal lot that they built on. At least that's the way it shows on the floodplain maps.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah, and it looks like, you know, on the finish line, they have basically kind of built up and developed right to the edge of what is the limits of the floodplain.
Yes. And so Wally, we did do just so you know, and everybody knows, the city of Rollingwood did a analysis of that creek from Bee Cave Road to Edge Grove, and actually looked at doing, if we channelize that, what it would do to the floodplain in that area. And that they also took into account what would happen downstream when that went on. And if I remember correctly, and Amber, correct me if I'm wrong here, didn't we actually go through and get the permission to do the channelization if we wanted to?
You know, I don't know the answer to that.
That's something I ought to check on. I think LNB did that, but
Okay.
I'm not sure where they stopped, frankly. But I thought they went ahead and did that whole thing. But regardless, right now it is what it is, and that's where we are.
So Tom, when you say channelization, are you talking about just right there in between the Palisades and finish line?
As I recall, their study and their deal went from all the way from where between Palisades and the finish line, all the way down to Edge Grove.
Okay.
Because we were looking at what it would take to redo that low water crossing. So I can check on that. We obviously, the city didn't do it, and we had intended to do it, but I can follow up and make sure that see where we stand on that study. Just for our information, I don't think it's something that we addressed on our committee, but whether we have it or not. And David, do you want to take this on and just go from there east and take the next lot, and then we can kind of work our way down the creek to get how the intent that I understood last meeting, and anybody that has a different understanding, please speak up. But it was my understanding that what we did was we wanted to look at this floodplain as a portion of a setback that might be in place at these areas. So
yeah, and so yeah, we just go kind of lot by lot, looking at the next lot over. You have the Jiffy Lube there,
right?
And actually there's and I didn't really realize this till I started looking at the aerials closer, but there's actually a water, it looks like a water quality pond in back of the Jiffy Lube that may drain part of the finish line in Jiffy Lube. I can't really tell, but there's a water quality pond back there that backs up to where the floodplain is. And that's kind of the limits of development.
And it appears to me there's about 60 feet of floodplain on that lot.
Could be. I don't have the lot limits on this, but if it backs up to the center line of the creek, that sounds about right.
Yeah, that's the calculation I used. Just assuming that our road was I just used the road widths and kind of put that in there to get that. And then, so we've got, anywhere around 60 feet, I think, of floodplain that they have back there. Our code currently, as it reads, is you wouldn't do any building on that. So this was done prior to the 100-foot green belt that we had. So that was done and be grandfathered on that. But you've got, you know, a pretty good amount that you come on that. Now, my floodplain shows that the road behind it is in the floodplain. South Crest at that point is in the 100-year floodplain. And it has flooded in the past. None of the homes on South Crest are in the floodplain, but the roadway is.
Yeah, I've shown a portion of it is on this map too.
Right.
Tom, on
Yeah.
that Crest property that the city owns,
Yes.
how is it zoned? Or does it have any zoning?
Good question. It's owned by the city, and did we zone it parking, park? Actually, Amber, you've got, you're not at the office. Do you have, I don't have a zoning map.
Yeah, let
Brooke,
me
I'll have
look
to
at
get
it.
back
I
with you on that. I don't know.
I don't think we've zoned that any differently. Let me pull it up and look and give you an answer.
Yeah, I don't recall it being zoned either.
It was originally zoned commercial.
Yeah,
I do know that.
This, if you go by zoning, it says it's professional and business office district.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
So it's zoned,
One.
yeah, C1, Brooke.
Yeah, C1.
I knew when we bought it, we didn't, I don't think we changed anything on that. It is primarily in the floodplain. There's a small portion of it it's not, but for the most part, it is all in the floodplain.
Yeah, looks like the tiny corner on Edge Grove isn't in the floodplain.
Yeah. And what we're looking at, let's see, you're on the finish line, right? Or did we go to that?
We went to Jiffy Lube.
Okay. So, Ryan, I know I saw you on here now. We've got around, and I just did the calculation on the width of the streets, but we've got about 60 feet on the Jiffy Lube that is within the floodplain that's nothing built on right now. And as I recall, we left this, we wanted to kind of look at the floodplain and see what kind of additional setback may be required based on that type of having that much in the floodplain on that. Now, David, you do this for a living, but if we channelized that creek and took some of this out of the floodplain, which is possible to do, and I think we got permission, but I'll confirm that to do so. It's been 10, 15 years since we did that. I think it's been that long, maybe not, maybe it's been a little less, but I know LNV did it. And we just have to go back and check and see where they stopped on it. I know they did the plans for channelizing it, and for some reason, I think they went ahead and got at least the Corps of Engineers permission to do it. Who else do we have to get permission from to do that?
There's two different ways you can go about doing it. I mean, if you're going to actually channelize that creek bed, you're going to have to go to the Corps of Engineers and get a 404 permit, because you'd actually be putting fill in waters of the U.S. under Section 404 of the Clean Water Act. So, and you'd be, depending on how long you were going for, you'd almost certainly have to get an individual permit, which would, require you doing NEPA, public comment, everything else. The other way to do it is basically if an individual lot owner were going to basically change the grade and build up and try to basically take areas that are in the floodplain out of the floodplain, you'd have to do it from an engineering standpoint and then go to FEMA and get a cloner to remove any areas out of the floodplain maps for flood insurance purposes. But as part of that, you'd have to also make sure in taking areas out of the floodplain or building them up, you're not basically going to contribute towards actually making the flood conditions worse downstream.
Yeah, and I know they did the engineering on it. I'm just not sure what permission they got. It's been been a little while.
Yeah,
Okay.
and that's something to check on. They may have done the engineering on it and then just not have gone all the way to the permitting with the Corps.
Okay. And so if we continue on east, we've got the Goodyear. And I've got anywhere from 70 to 100 feet that they own that is in the floodplain.
Yeah, and their back parking lot, the back line of the parking lot basically abuts where the floodplain is.
Yes. Okay. And then the next lot, which is the little retail center,
It's where the Goodwill and the cleaners is.
right? They actually have 2 lots there. And I show that their lot line is at the 100-year floodplain.
Yeah, that's what I got too.
So they have no area behind there other than our 5 acres that would count as setback. And then the next lot is the Mustagattis. And again, it is not, I don't show any of their property in the floodplain.
Hey, so Tom, going back, there's 2 different little strip centers on those 2 lots. Are those owned by the same people? Is that what you're saying?
I don't know if they're owned by the same people or not.
Yeah.
I just show both of them being out of the floodplain.
Yeah.
So for some reason, I don't believe they are the same group.
I don't believe so.
So, and then the service station on the corner, I show that to be totally out of the floodplain.
Correct.
And then our next lot, which would be across Edge Grove, is the vet center. And I show that to be at least half of that lot is in the floodplain.
And it looks like actually the back side of those buildings hang over the floodplain.
Yes. And that is probably he's got maybe 75 to, it varies because it's not straight, but it's somewhere between, I would say on the average, he's got about 60 to 70 feet that's in the floodplain.
Right.
That he owns. And then the next building is the office building, one of the office buildings, 2720 BKs. And on that one, I show at least half of the lot is in the floodplain.
Yeah.
And I can't tell where the building is on that, but it looks like to me the building is built close to BKs, so it's out of the floodplain. But
I actually look. Which one are you looking at?
2720. It would be the second lot right next to the vet center.
Yeah, because I'm showing that one, actually the back part of the building overhangs the floodplain.
From our purposes of trying to figure out the setback on that, you're looking at well over 100 feet from the lot line before you get out of the floodplain.
Yeah.
And then our next little lot, which is 2714, has a fairly small amount of floodplain there, which I was surprised at, but it has generally very little. It's got one corner. The northwest corner of their lot is in the floodplain, but from a setback standpoint, they have very little that's in the floodplain. And then the surprising one to me is the Chinatown Center, because I thought that that had a lot more floodplain than it had, frankly. They must, well, I'm not sure why, but it showed that there's probably less than, on the northwest corner, it's probably 20 feet of floodplain, and then at the south, on the northeast corner, it probably is equal to 50 feet or 60 feet of floodplain, depending on where you do. But it's a lot less than I thought it was in that floodplain on that. Glad we looked at this. Brooke, do you remember when that shopping center flooded?
I do not.
Memorial Day, 1980, it flooded.
I remember that day.
Yeah.
Not the Chinatown. I remember that's when the pavement was washed off Big Caves Road, somewhere between where the town center is now and Chinatown.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that flooded. Okay. And then, David, as we go to the next lot, I show that to have about 30 to 40 feet of floodplain. That would be the service station.
Yeah, and that, I mean, if you recall, I mean, that actually has, it's built up, and they actually have it looks like a retaining wall along the back that basically, that drops off pretty good. That basically keeps it out of the floodplain.
Yeah. And then the next lot I have, which is 2708, is there's two lots there. And I can't read the number on that. I'm sorry, my eyesight's not as good as it was. The next two lots, the floodplain pretty much is almost to Bee Caves Road. And it has significant land behind it as a setback, but it's all vertical.
Are you talking about 2708 and 2706?
Yes. Yeah, I just couldn't read the.
Yeah, those two, I mean, you're right, the floodplain on those two comes up almost all the way to the sidewalk.
Yeah. And then, of course, the next ones are Rollingwood Town Center, and excuse me, the next one is the
So Tom, effectively on just a note on 2708 and 2706 Bee Caves.
Yes.
Basically, under the current zoning, I think those are undevelopable.
It would be, it would take you could potentially put a building on 2708 if you span the creek to put parking on the far side. That would be the only way I could see that would happen. It wouldn't be very economical.
Everything would but Tom, you couldn't with the setback. You don't have enough room back there spanning the creek and putting, because it would, you'd have to shove it right up, and that lot's kind of angular anyways.
Yeah.
By the time you got to the other side of the creek, you'd only have a little bit of a corner, and you'd have to shove it up right on the back of that lot, which would back up to 2 Timberline Ridge, 3 Timberline Ridge.
Right. No, I agree. It'd be incredible. I don't know if you can do it or not, but I mean, remember, we do have one building spanning the creek, so somebody figured out some way to do it years and years ago, but kind of a tough deal on today's environment, I think, to do.
And I know who, pretty sure I know who developed that. So, different deal, different time.
Then our next lots are
Hey,
all,
Tom, this is Ryan. Can I follow up with David on that?
sure.
On 2706 and 2708, just throwing it out there, not that anybody wants it, but what would it take for that to become buildable at all? Are there any set of rules that we could allow that would make that buildable, or would it literally be right up against people's backyards?
It depends. I mean, like everything else, right? It depends on how creative, someone wanted to be and was able to be. I mean, conceivably, it's all in the floodplain, with a little bit right on Bee Caves Road out of the floodplain. It's conceivable you could do kind of a deal similar to what's going to be the I Center now, and basically just build a structure almost entirely on stilts. I mean, that's kind of how you'd have to do it, to keep it out of the floodplain and everything else. And you'd have to deal with the creek bed there, and you have to deal with the floodplain, and it would be structurally, from a permitting standpoint and everything else, it would be a lot of work and a lot of expense. And then even still, I don't know where you'd park it.
There's probably room, Ryan, to build a very small building on the south side of that lot adjacent to Bee Caves Road. Now, parking would be, I don't know where you would park, because it's not, I don't think it's enough room to build anything of any consequence and then have parking there. Unless you put the parking on the north side of the creek and excavated out a area there, and then you're close to the 100-foot greenbelt setback on those lots, clearly, I think. I mean, you could put some there, but it would be, there's basically a vertical cliff there on the north side of that creek. So it'd be fairly, I mean, it would be incredibly expensive, to do. I always hesitate to say you can't do it.
Yeah.
People do things like that.
And those lots aren't real big anyways.
No.
I just, out of curiosity, I just pulled the TCAT appraised value for 2708, and it's $191,000, which suggests that TCAT doesn't think it's very buildable either.
Yeah.
Because it's, buildable area is mostly floodplain, and then you have topo issues. So.
And
Does that channelizing study impact that and removing the floodplain and making it buildable?
well, you mean the one that Rollingwood did?
Yeah.
No, our study only went from basically Edge Grove to the west to Bee Caves Road. But we did have to determine, as David pointed out, once you do a channelization study, you have to take into account how that will affect the floodplain downstream, because you're not allowed to you're not allowed to cause them any problem with that. So, Meredith, to answer your question, they could channelize that, provided they did not. They would have to take into account the effect of that on the downstream property owners. They can't make theirs any worse downstream. Does that answer your question?
Well, I'm in the car, so I'm not looking at the map,
Oh.
but I was just curious if by channelizing, pulling the water off the properties to the side and keeping it in the center of the creek, if that positively impacted any of these properties and, added to their buildable out of the floodplain.
You can always do that. You have to engineer it you have to get, I think there's actually, is it 3 permits or 2 permits you have to get? I know you have to get the Corps of Engineers, and I think you have to get FEMA approval to do it also.
For
And of course, you have
channelization,
to get the City of Rolling Woods approval to do it.
for channelization, you mean, Tom?
Yes.
Yeah, you would, because the only reason to channelize would be in order to revise the floodplain maps for national flood insurance to make it buildable. So yeah, so you'd have to do, Army Corps 404 permit, and then you'd have to basically get a CLOMER or a LOMER letter of map revision for the floodplain map changes, and you'd have to get Rolling Woods approval.
But that's on a property by property basis, right? And not a municipal project basis.
Yeah, the only municipal project we did was we actually looked at and engineered a possible channelization between Edge Grove and 2B Caves Road going west, between the Palisades and Finish Line over to Edge Grove.
Yeah, the city would still have to get a Army Corps 404 permit for that.
And just from a timing standpoint, David, and I know, how long is a piece of string? If I remember correctly, that is a 24, 36 month process to go through.
Yeah, because you'd be in an individual permitting situation, meaning that you'd have to do NEPA, comply with NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act, meaning you'd have to do a EA, possibly an EIS, which would throw you into a 24 to 36 month permitting process for an individual permit.
Now, and Meredith, just so you know, all the properties downstream, which are not only in Rollingwood, but go into the city of Austin, you have to make sure that you don't have any adverse effect on them by channelization of that. So, and it's not a easy thing to do, but it could be done. I'm not saying
it could be done. Well, and what you're looking at is potentially something akin to, everyone knows what the permitting, how long the permitting lasted and drug on for the City of Austin Waller Creek project. And that was arguably a tunnel in at least one area. But whenever you're talking about channelization, you're talking about taking a natural structure and basically creating a man-made structure. So it's going to require some pretty significant permitting work with the state and feds.
And 2706, Meredith, and I know you were driving, but 2706 shows to be generally 100%. The floodplain goes all the way to BK's Road, except for a very little small sliver that is on the corner there. That's that lot.
Well, and I guess I have a more general question along that David's, Waller Creek analogy, because that's exactly what they did, and that was a much, much larger project and probably would be necessary on Dry Creek. But if there were some municipal study that looks at, if we channelize as a municipal project our section of the creek, does it positively impact the properties, increase their development potential?
And that's a good point.
Tax increment and financing, so the city's not even paying for it. The redevelopment projects that now have, whatever 70% developable land where they had 0 before. Has anybody looked at anything like that?
Well, we did when we looked at when we did the engineering for the channelization from Edge Grove to BK's Road. Because that's specifically why we looked at that, as to whether we could increase any of our commercial properties from that standpoint.
And also you could potentially take if you did the project there, I mean, the real, you may not get much additional developable area on any of the existing lots right now because of either setbacks or, you know, particularly the Shell station, the former Gaddies, and those two strip centers are basically kind of built kind of back along the existing property line. The Goodyear, the Jiffy Lube, and the Finish Line are built along the floodplain. You could get them some extra room, but then you'd be backing them. Well, if you channelize it, you could give them some extra buildable area in the back, but then you'd be moving them back towards residences. The real cherry on that channelization project would be potentially taking all or part of the city-owned, I guess that's like what, about 5 acres down there, Tom?
Yes.
Floodplain, all or part of out of the floodplain.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's significant.
Yeah, and I think that's why we did that years ago, Meredith, just to know that we would be able to use that for some purpose of helping with the commercial development there, redevelopment of it. These lots that we're talking about now, 2708 and 2706, even if you channelized it, you would not increase the buildable area very much.
You could get them a little buildable area in the front, right up against the road, potentially.
Yeah, it's still going to be a very minor building.
It can be a teeny tiny. I mean, that's the problem though. Is yeah, you could get them a little bit of property up front, but I mean, you maybe have room for a small building, but you don't have much parking unless someone. The only potential play there is if someone bought both lots. If someone had both lots and you could basically channelize it and build it up, but even still, it's going to be a pretty massive undertaking for, you know, I'm not sure what your business there or what you'd end up putting there.
Hey, Tom, this is Ryan again.
Yes, sir.
Just wanted to mention also, again, for out of curiosity, I pulled the owner. The owner of those two lots is a corporation that the president is a resident of Rollingwood.
Right.
So it might be worth reaching out. I mean, it's possible that they were simply purchased for conservation purposes, and this whole conversation is moot. But it might be worth, like we did on the hospital district, reaching out to the owner and asking if there's.
I know his representative that handles that, and I'll be glad to do that.
Sounds good.
Skipping those two right now, but you know, the bottom line on these two is, and we're talking primarily on what we're talking about now, is how this would impact the rear greenbelt area. And both of these two lots, even if you do channelize it or build on it, it's not going to, it's still going to have, you're still going to be butting up against the residential properties although most of it would require excavation to even utilize any of that property behind it. But Ryan, that's a good point, and I'll make sure I do that. The next track is built on, it's got the bank building on it, and it's part of the PUD with Rollingwood Town Center, which they have completed all their projects. So I'm guessing that that's not something that we need to spend a great deal of time on, unless anybody wants to. And the tracks that are remaining is the church track has some floodplain down below, and then we have 3 of our residential lots that have floodplain. That's, you know, and the creek actually flows through the middle of, not through the middle, but throughout their property on the backside. Their homes are not in the floodplain, obviously, but some of their track is. So with that said, we get down to on the setbacks. The only tracks that I looked at when I looked at this that would benefit from a diminished setback because of the floodplain would be those that would abut our 5 acres off of Edge Grove, and the 2 that are on the east side of Edge Grove, the vet center and the little office building there. Those 2, which is 2724 and 2720 BK's Road. They're the only properties that I saw that when looking at this that would make a significant difference on that. And David, what do you think? You looked at this too.
Which ones are you specifically looking at?
I'm looking at the tracks, how we would address the setbacks on those properties that are abut Rolling Woods 5 acre lot. That would be the service station all the way over to the finish line. And the vet center on the corner and the little office building next door. They have significant areas of floodplain that would make a difference.
Yeah, I mean, and part of it is looking at and putting aside the 2 that back up to the city of Rollingwood places, that the vet center and the office building there, I mean, are already, so limited on what they can build due to the floodplain that, I mean, if you say, well, 100-foot setback for those 2 lots,
they already have it.
Well, you almost make it undevelopable because you're limiting what's already severely limited anyways.
Yeah. And to address Meredith's point, the floodplain there is very broad. That's a fairly low area in there. So it's, that could potentially do that. And, but I don't see, because that's lower than the homes in Rollingwood behind that are to the south, to the north of them, excuse me.
Yeah. Well, and Tom also measuring, like the back of that vet center is 260 feet to the next closest residential house.
Now, but the residents on Grove Court own
across the street. That's right.
They own across the street, so but the building currently is probably within, it's right at 100 feet from the vet's lot line, or close to it, at the furthest point anyway. Yeah,
it's probably pretty close to it.
Yeah. And then the office building is certainly more than 100 feet back from their lot line.
Maybe.
So the question is that I looked at on this is, okay, if they develop without channelizing the creek, they're already going to be 100 feet back from the lot line. If they channelize that, then do we want to have a 100-foot setback? And because they are a lower area to those homes on Edge Grove and Timberline, my feeling is that we should keep that there. The lots that are abutting Rolling Woods 5 acres, I believe we should allow them to have not count the setback on that, but count the green belt as part of their setback. Excuse me, they count the Rolling Wood property as part of their green belt.
But since they abut, commercial zoning, are they
Yeah.
subject to the same rear setback as if they butted residential?
That's a good point.
They wouldn't be subject to
They,
the.
they wouldn't be subject to that.
They would be, Amber?
No, they wouldn't.
Would be, yeah.
Okay,
What's the commercial setback in the back?
20 feet.
Well, someone was smarter than we are and already thought of this thing.
But we just didn't change the zoning. You know, surprisingly, all of that property where Edge Grove, where Grove Court is, was zoned commercial at one time. So
What is it zoned commercial now? I thought that's
no, it's been changed to residential.
Well, then it would have the 100-foot setback.
It would from those properties that abut Grove Court. Yes. Now
I thought
and-
David just said the opposite.
no,
My
no.
misunderstanding?
No, I said at one time, the area that comprises Grove Court was zoned commercial, but it's since been changed to residential. So the 100-foot setback that would abut Grove Court would require the 100-foot green belt.
Right. You're talking about those 3 lots, the 2A, 3A, 4A.
Yes, they're zoned residential.
Correct.
Right, but what
And
about,
And
what
then
about-
you have
go ahead.
Big Grove Court that backs up to 2720 and 2714 Bee Cave anyways.
Yeah. Ryan, go ahead.
The 4 properties on the west side of Edge Grove, 2800, 2802, 2808, and 2814.
Right.
They currently abut what appears to be zoned professional and business office districts, the
That
lot
is-
owned by the city.
That's correct.
Okay, so that is zoned commercial, which means those 4 lots only have a 20-foot setback currently. Is that right?
I think I'm correct that it's 20 feet.
It seems to me that we would recommend that the court, here I am at work, that the city rezone that to be park, but to allow those 4 lots to maintain their 20-foot setback, if that's what it is.
Whatever. I think it's 20. You know, it could be.
Tom, I'll look it up and confirm for you.
Yeah, because I think it may be 30, but I can't remember. But I think that's a good, I think that's the only difference would be, and I'm not sure why that had, when we purchased this, that's what it was. And I don't think anybody has changed it. But I see what you're saying, Ryan, and that's probably a good use for that right there. Now, you know, we could, now, in any event, they wouldn't be subject to the 100-foot green belt. So
Well, would they if we changed it to parkland and didn't?
the ordinance says, if I'm going by memory, but it says that if it's adjacent to a residential district, and parkland would not be zoned as a residential district. We might
Right.
be,
Park has its own zoning.
yeah,
Minimum setbacks 20 feet.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, 30 feet from the rear lot
Oh,
line.
okay,
And
yeah.
it says no closer than 20 feet from the front lot line.
right. Okay. All right. So I'm okay, Ryan, how we do it to give these guys the ability to develop this area and into retail that will generate some money for us. I'm not opposed to that, as long as we, if they had 100-foot green belt, their properties would be basically undevelopable because they're very small pieces of property.
And is the current zoning for those 4 that we're talking about, is that 2-story right now?
Let me look.
I believe it is, but I let Amber check. Now, let me ask everybody on just going from Edge Grove to the east, because that's what we've been focusing on here. Is there any of these lots that, because of the topography, we would be willing to recommend that the 100-foot green belt would not apply? Just topography. Obviously, the green belt was set up to have a visual impact and a noise impact back from our residential properties.
Tom, can you state that again, that it would apply or would not apply? I just didn't hear.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I was just asking the question and trying to get everybody's opinion. Are there any properties going east from Edge Grove that, because of the topography or the floodplain areas, that we would be willing to suggest that we either we make an adjustment on the 100-foot green belt?
Well, if you want to encourage development, you pretty much have to make that recommendation. I mean, I'm an old developer. Can't help it.
Yeah, I mean, you're really, I mean, you're going to really, and I can't really tell where all the buildings are in relation to right now as built, where they are in relation to back property lines. But going from, that leap to a 100-foot green belt, and particularly on lots where there's nothing, I mean, there's not 100-foot green belt, makes no sense to me, other than just trying to limit development.
Well, this is Brooke. I may be missing something here, but I'm not understanding with respect to where these lots abut residential property, where the 100-foot green belt lies. We've looked at the lot with respect to the floodplain, but I don't think we've looked at it from the floodplain to the back of the residential property. That's what I'm not certain of here.
Most of these, the floodplain is not going to, it does abut some of the residential lots down on Delana, but that's it. Because of the topography, the residential areas are above the commercial. And the question is, currently our 100-foot green belt would say you cannot develop, you can't put a parking lot, you can't do anything 100-foot back from the rear setback that abuts a residential area.
And Tom, let's talk about, you can't redevelop. So
Redevelop.
if you redevelop, you're basically going to have to, if you're going to apply the 100-foot setback on the vast majority of these properties, effectively what you're going to have to do in a redevelopment scenario is basically tear up parking and or tear down buildings, and basically force someone to revegetate anywhere, depending on the property, anywhere from 40 to 60 feet.
Yeah.
A 40 to 60 foot swath that was developed that they can no longer develop, and it's either going to be dirt unless you force them to revegetate it.
So really the only there's only 2 lots that I looked at on here that that are applicable in this case. And that is the Chinatown restaurant and the one 2714, which is to the left of the Chinatown restaurant, the little building. Those are the only 2 that I saw that would, because of the floodplain, that would cause that to be, David, to come in.
What
Tom,
about,
that
the chevron?
come in, you mean that if you were to redevelop Chinatown or 2714, there's property currently within the setback that if the setback were removed would be above the floodplain. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
You could build within, the 30 feet of the rear setback on both of those 2 properties at some point.
Meaning you could build, meaning it's possible, it's above the floodplain.
It's physically able to be built, but you could not, based on our current ordinance requiring a 100-foot green belt.
What would be the remaining, what would be the setback if you didn't have the 100-foot setback?
The old setback was 30 feet.
And is that what you're suggesting?
No, I'm not suggesting that. I think these 2 properties have the potential to have these are the only 2 that I saw on this side that would have an impact on the residential areas behind them given that there's a floodplain there, that you would have that would make that you could have an adverse effect on the residents behind it. Because of the elevation there is not great, and you are looking down on this, but it's very close to these residences.
What about the chevron?
The chevron, he's basically I don't know how you would redevelop that since he put in a fairly major retaining wall to contain the creek.
Right.
I think that's pretty much it. And if you looked at that, David, I think probably his building line where his retaining wall is about 70 feet back from the residential area. Now that one is.
Well, I'm not.
So that one's really interesting. If you look at the map, that the city's map of it,
I'm not sure that's
there's a
right.
triangle that comes, like kind of a reverse triangle that breaks into
Yeah.
it. As far as I can tell, that reverse triangle tracks the creek. And I go back there all the time because that's
Yeah,
right.
it does.
Couple houses down from my house and the creek in the back. My kid and I go fossil hunting on a couple times a month back there. And that, I'm guessing that line is roughly where the retaining wall is, the back of that triangle. So it's nowhere near the house, but my guess is it's very, very close to the property line where that triangle cuts in.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yes, it probably is. There's a steep cliff on the other side of that, and
on the bee cave side, there's a cliff. On the other side, there's not. I mean, there is a cliff, but it's not the giant retaining wall.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I see what you're
he's
saying.
got a really strange lot. If his whole that rectangle on the southeast side of that is completely cut off by the creek.
Yeah. I see. I couldn't see, but my lines kind of my topo lines took the property line. I was looking at the wrong one. Thank you, Ryan. You're right. So his property actually crosses the creek.
Yeah.
So Tom, again, I'm asking the question that if the current zoning imposes 100-foot setback, what would be the new setback?
Oh, I'm not proposing one. On that.
And Tom, is there any way to get kind of an inventory?
Nothing, or are you proposing, or you just don't know what the setback would be?
Well, if the 100-foot green belt, if we I'm posing the question, what would we want the setback to be? on
Is
the property?
there any way to get as-built inventory of where the current setback effectively is in an as-built scenario? Because we're talking about a redevelopment scenario for all of these lots. And I just feel like if I had a better feel for, okay, this one is, here's basically the as-built setback on this lot. Here's as-built setback on this lot. Here's as-built. And then you look at them comparatively to, where the floodplain is. I feel like I could get there a little bit better because, I think from if you want to discourage redevelopment, I think you keep with this, and really the idea of 100-foot green belt when all these properties are developed is largely a fiction anyways. You're talking about 100-foot setback for redevelopment scenario. You're really not talking about a green belt effectively. But I'm also not in the camp that says, well, we automatically need to go, back to 30 feet, fall back to 30 feet on all of them because, effectively, if we look at them and the majority of them are, 50, 60 feet already, we may want to say, hey, we think that's pretty good, pretty protective. Let's, instead of going back to 30 feet, let's go to 50 or 60 feet because that's effectively where we should be anyways.
May I interrupt here for a minute?
Sure.
If you would do this, as David says, go in and look at my property with a topographical map as the guide. I have 4 buildings. All 4 of the buildings, the ridge of the roof is below the level of the floor of the first floor of every home behind it with a 30-foot setback. If you look at the whole thing, Tom, you started off doing so, look at the whole thing topographically, there's no reason for my setback to be different than 30. Right now, the 100-foot setback wipes out every building I have in the green belt, which if they burn down or whatever, are not rebuildable according to state code as I understand it currently written. So if you wanted, you had to do what you had to do to bring Endeavor into compliance with what you had to accomplish. But the problem was in that doing, you made a whole huge restriction that has restricted the whole north side of the street. And David, you're right on the line. My lot can have a 30-foot setback because my building pads are all something like 40 or 50 feet below the level of the back of my lot, which is the back of my lot is anywhere from 5 to 15 feet below the floor level of the houses built behind me. I think it's unreasonable to say you can't build as though they were on a level lot. They should be able to have a 1-story house built next to them. According to the current code where my site is, I can't build to a 1-story opposite them. That makes no sense, but topographically, there should be some way to look at this more sensibly than the massive green belt that just laid down everything.
Yeah, I think, Wally, that's what I'm trying to get to is you take the lots from not only the topographical areas, how they impact the residences, but also look at the floodplain to see how that impacts the setbacks if we go. And I think, the city council asked us to look at lot by lot, and that's what I want to do. Getting to these lots, there is, and these, I guess it's these 3 lots that I'd like to focus on here: 2714, 2712, and 2710. Because
pardon me. I do not define the lots by address because I've never paid attention. Give me an idea who's there.
Lots on the right and left of Chinatown Shopping Center.
Got it.
That way, Wally. That's how I would clarify it anyway. The Chevron station, the Chinatown restaurant, and that little office building adjacent to it, going your way.
This is Ryan. I mean, I kind of agree with David that without I think this is what he was saying, David. I apologize if I'm getting this wrong. Without knowing the current the current distance between the back of the building, the current back of the building, and where it would be if we had 100-foot or 50-foot or 30-foot, it's really hard to determine.
Okay.
So for example, I'll just give you the one that affects me the most, Chinatown. I don't know if all of that, if their current existing building is within 100 feet of the lot line, or if I don't know if there's 150 feet there, or if there's 30 feet there. I'm not sure. The current placement of those buildings, if you look at the flood map, that's all they did. They traced the creek.
Yeah.
So obviously that was very much the design of the building was designed not to impact the creek, which I appreciate. If there's 130 feet, I can't imagine there is, but if let's say that there's a current distance between the back of those buildings and the lot line is 70 feet instead of 100. And so they couldn't build where they are now if they burned down. Even as a person directly impacted by them, I don't know that I would think that was a fair deal to them, because I don't think that they're currently too close to us. I think they're currently a good distance from us. That's me. I haven't talked to everybody around us, but they appear to me to be an appropriate distance away. And so if they needed to have a smaller setback to rebuild what they have now, I wouldn't have a huge objection. And if you look at the one to the west of that, I actually pulled them up on TCAD, and it's a lot easier to see the lot lines and the creek lines on TCAD. And if you do that, the lot next to it, so the lot to the west of the Chinatown development, they actually have a lot, they have even more area on the south side of the creek that's currently buildable for them. I don't know if it would be buildable within 100-foot setback. And I don't know if what of that falls into 100-foot setback, but it is they have more space. They didn't take advantage of their entire lot like many of the others did.
So let's think how I can get that. We could use the TCAD does it by I would say Google Maps, but I don't think they do. But TCAD's location of the buildings on their lots are fairly accurate, I think. And we could take that, I could take that TCAD and we could calculate the 100-foot back from that, if that's helpful to you, and put 30-foot and 100-foot contoured lines on that. I think that would be a way I could do it.
Yeah, and Tom, that would be helpful for me too, also on the Grove Court side as well. It was hard for me to keep up with all that as well.
Sure. I think I can get that now, with the understanding that I'll be using the TCAT maps as to where the current buildings are. And I think that's reasonably accurate, but it's not I can't guarantee it's 100%, but
yeah, it's definitely approximate, because I'm looking at it right now and some of the buildings cross the property lines, and I suspect they don't in reality. So it's a bit of a guess.
Would that be sufficient for y'all if we did that? I'm trying to think any other way I can do it. I can't obviously survey each of these buildings.
Oh, come on, Tom.
Hey, Tom, I may be able to call in a favor and get someone that I do a lot of work with, ask them if they can basically just pull it up on, do a little GIS work for me and show the distances. Why don't I do that, and that's kind of call in a favor and see if they will help us out a little bit, and just kind of do an exhibit showing it, and basically do it basically. And what I would do is show it doing distance is a setback to the edge of buildings or to the edge of parking or to the edge of any concrete.
Any development.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So yeah, that's an easy enough thing to show. So why don't I ask if I can call in a little bit of favor on that and kind of create an exhibit, or rather have a GIS exhibit created for us.
And let me address Wally's. Wally, you were there. We were doing all this. I can tell you the expectation was when the 100-foot setback was there, there was going to be, and when you had redevelopment, there was going to be the potential to have a variance. Whether or not legally we can do a green belt variance or a setback variance, and that's a legal question I haven't asked yet, because I thought if our city attorney decides that it's a green belt is not subject to a variance, then we have to change it it provided we don't come up with some other recommendations on here anyway. I do agree wholeheartedly with Wally in that the setback is moot where there is topography that does not, that warrants not having a setback. And Wally, specifically in your property, I just don't see that many people would be able to tell the difference between a 30 and 100-foot setback on your property, because you'd have to be looking straight down to be able to tell that difference for the most part, provided that our lighting, we have the correct lighting and we're not throwing lights in, but we do have ordinances on that anyway.
No lights in the back of the building.
So, well, a redevelopment may have the parking that goes in the back, and they do have to have lighting on that. And so, but we have ordinances on lighting that pertain to that already. So that should be a deal. But, that's what I was trying to get to on this, as to whether we have topography or floodplains that would warrant any discussion on these properties. And I was specifically just addressing those properties right now that were to the east of Edgegrove. So any other comments on those things? I think we know where we're going to go. David, even you guys do that. I'm going to try to take the TCAD and see if I can at least approximate it from my standpoint.
So I'm also on the city of Austin property profile GIS page right now, and they have an incredible platform with measurement tools and floodplains and lot lines and building footprints, and it's all right there.
Okay. And
I can send you that link.
Yeah. Meredith giving me a link to a web page is not. I have to have a ruler to do mine, but I appreciate it. I'll get my grandchildren to help me with it. They can.
There you go.
Yeah, Meredith, send that to me too, if you don't mind.
Okay. I mean, I can send the whole. I'll tell you what. I'll send it to Ashley and Amber, and they can disperse.
Great. That'll be good.
Thank you.
Ryan, would that help?
Yeah, I mean, I just want everybody to understand best we can the impact of what it is we're talking about. I mean, I think it sounds like we all agree that if a building is not imposing negatively on the neighbors as it exists, that we probably don't have any significant objection to it being rebuilt on its same pad. Even if that would be within 100 feet of the back of the property.
Okay. And I'm gonna throw one other thing out there as we go through this. There will be some times when we have, hopefully we will have somebody that says, look, I'm gonna put a smaller green belt, but heavily landscape it or do something, a trail, whatever they do that they put there. And would we as a group consider that as a factor when you go in and make a recommendation about setbacks, we put that caveat in there that there would be some consideration given if it is if there are other external factors that somebody can do to minimize the setback. And I'm just throwing that out there for discussion. I don't have anything specifically to put.
I would be in favor of that.
So, and you know, we've got some incredibly bright people, and I don't want to inhibit our development community from coming up with this really great idea that would be fully acceptable to our residents and to maximize their values of the property that we would kind of cut off. And that's is that something that we would consider without knowing exactly what we're asking about, or kind of saying that there may be some other considerations that the developer can provide to offset that would be acceptable to the city of Rollingwood?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Meredith. Any other comments on that?
I would be fearful of an open-ended, we did all this work, but if for some reason the city thinks otherwise, it can do whatever it wants if somebody has a tree that they want to pin in. So I personally would not, if we're going to do all this work to figure out what we're comfortable with, and we're going to take it to the residents and ask them, is everybody comfortable with this? And we all get on board. And then, you know, 5 years later, somebody comes to the city and says, I know you did all that work, but I can put up some trees. I'm not sure I like that idea.
Okay. Well, Ryan, as an attorney, y'all always have to look at the downside of that stuff. And I understand it. And I'm glad you do it, because that protects us all. So I appreciate it.
But I don't think that it has to be totally open-ended. That, I mean, the letter of the law and the spirit of the law, right? Like, that's what I'm hearing, is that if the spirit of the law is to protect the residential properties, and you know, and then we don't have to define the letter of the law. That's just kind of my thought on that.
Okay. Let's each give a little thought to that as to what we may want to maybe narrow the focus a little bit, Ryan, that would do that. And you can make it so it's pretty tough to get approval. Remember, we do have the ability to require a supermajority of our council members to grant those type of things. We can craft when it gets down to crafting an ordinance, you can have it to where it requires a supermajority to do it. And there are some instances we currently have in Rollingwood that do require a supermajority of votes from a city council. That's not full protection, I grant that, but it's something. So, okay. If y'all don't mind, can each of us give a little thought to how we maybe narrow that? Ryan, I think that your point is good, because, you know, nobody knows what's going to happen, you know, 5 years from now. So, so that's,
and I totally agree with that as well.
and so, you know, and it may be that if we can't get comfortable with that, we just don't put it in there. That's the bottom line. I see your point, Ryan, and I think it's well taken on that. Okay. So I think we know what we're doing on I guess I need to do this, try to get this done on all the properties on the south side, the north side of Bee Caves Road. Is that everybody's understanding?
And Tom, what you're going to do is try to give us a graphic that would show where the current build out is for each of these lots relative to the adjacent property and the 100-foot setback.
Yes. And
okay.
And there's one additional thing that I would put in there. And Meredith, I have actually used that before, and I forgot that I'd used it. But that also shows the topography, if I'm not mistaken. It's been a long time, but and if it does that, that would be a good benefit to be able to tell, you know, where the homes are in relationship to the height of the buildings that are there now.
And consider, Tom, that any of these buildings could go to 2 stories?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. So, but that's not really what I'm looking at. Is I'm looking at how the currently, I mean, it'll, I'm not sure I'll be able to do that on this deal, but I can show how the, what the elevation is of the existing lots and the elevation of the residential homes behind it.
Great.
So,
Well, and one more detail. I'm looking now at the TCAD map
yes,
and showing that the city of Rollingwood owns a lot that is to the west of the finish line. It's basically the creek bed.
okay. You got me on that one, Brooke. I did not know that we owned that.
So that too may be a detail to flesh out.
I'm looking at the same map. Does the city also own what appears to be behind even that entire row?
Are you talking about the one that comes down on the cul-de-sac right
Yeah,
behind?
it's gray. It's grayed
Yeah, I think
out,
that's-
and
I will tell you, I believe, and I'm having to, you're making my memory jog here. I believe when we did the development on Edge Grove and on the cove there, that cul-de-sac, I can't remember the name of it. Ryan, it's behind you. What's the cul-de-sac that you're in?
It's undeveloped, right? It's undeveloped right away, Tom.
I believe when that subdivision was done, I don't want to take up everybody's time, but I can tell you, originally where Grove Court goes, a plan was to run a road of commercial use from where Edge Grove is all the way over to Timberline. And I think this little area was left out, and I think when it was platted, it was donated to the city or dedicated to the city somehow.
Tom, I'm talking about a different lot. Those lots between the commercial lots and the homes on Timberline, those are private residential. I'm talking about the lots behind on the west side of Edge Grove. There appears to be a gray, but I think David's saying that's a right of way. Is that right, David?
Yeah, it's
grayed out lot.
yeah, that's undeveloped. That's city right away, road right away.
Yeah, Ryan, remember when we were visiting earlier that I said that the city of, and Amber, jump in, help me here. If I remember correctly, Edge Grove Drive originally was planned to be 20 feet wider than it currently is. And I believe the city has 20 feet of land that goes down Edge Grove.
But it also extends past the cul-de-sac too.
Yeah, I think at one point maybe South Crest was planned to go through. But
Yeah,
now-
so that's South Crest right of way that looks like it dead ends into the east end of the Palisades.
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that if there is no, I don't know, we need to ask Amber if there is any use for that, if the city needs that. But if the city isn't planning on putting a road there that dead ends into a property, that would be another opportunity to convert to parkland and let the adjacent business owners build closer to the back of their lots, because they would not impact anybody.
And my thought on that is, instead of the setback, and I'm just throwing this out there, instead of the setback being from, let's say I'm the owner of a commercial piece of property, instead of my setback being from my property line that's closest to the residential property line, in this situation, there's this right of way in between. Could that right of way contribute to the setback? So, the point of the setback is so nothing will ever be built in it. And if you can get 20 feet there, and then you only, have to do 70 feet of setback on your own property, some language kind of like that, so that the buffer's there, just doesn't necessarily have to be on your own property.
I think that's effectively the same thing that I'm getting at by saying, let's convert it to parkland and then have a different setback, a smaller setback. If they're facing parkland in the rear, since, and maybe there already is, I don't know, what's the setback for a right of way? Maybe they already only have a 20, 30 foot setback.
The way that was written is said it's that you have commercial property that abuts a residential district. And we got a lot of attorneys that the question is, okay, would that right of way be part of the residential district? My feeling is probably not, but I don't know. That's a good point, Meredith and Ryan. I appreciate that. But that's something that we can clarify as we go through this.
Yeah, and I know the zoning typically includes the streets, but
Okay.
I don't know, you could possibly make an argument either way since it's backing up to the property on paved. And then I was going to say that standard right of way, but this includes the road and right of way on either side of the properties in Rollingwood is 60 feet.
Right.
So possibly that's a 40-foot road there.
Yeah, Edge Grove is fairly narrow. So
Yeah.
Well, one other thing to put on the table is, would either that city right of way or the property, the right of way along Edge Grove, allow for potential development of a sidewalk or bike path that could access these commercial properties?
Yeah. Again, the difference would be, Brooke.
Than BK's Road.
Yes. To answer your question, yes, it could, provided that we would have to make sure that that was not in the floodplain.
Yeah.
And that's frankly, one of the things one consideration we used when we looked at doing the engineering for channelization of that creek at that time was to raise it out enough to be have an impact on the commercial properties there, but we could certainly make it high enough to get out of the floodplain for not only a pedestrian walkway, but for a golf cart too. I don't, just so for full information, I don't have a golf cart, but that's, I do have a motorcycle. I guess I could drive.
That would give you at least golf cart access to a bar potentially, Tom.
No, I don't drive.
I do like the creativity of what Brooke brought up though, because I think it'd be awesome and I think people would love it if let's say that we do something that allows property owners to develop further back. Let's assume for the moment that we're all comfortable with that position in some way. Why not ask in return for a sidewalk in the back of the property that benefits all of us?
Ryan, in that line, when we looked at doing this channelization, and it's a really long-term deal, we assumed that this area would redevelop. And we actually had two thoughts in mind. One, if we were able to tie in these properties that may be redeveloped with maybe Wally's property to be redeveloped. Nothing's wrong with your property now, Wally, but you know what I mean. That it would not only entail the improvement of this 5 acres or whatever it was, but it would also entail some improvements on Edge Grove Drive drainage, low water crossing.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that may have been a stretch at the time, but I know that was under consideration as part of what we were talking about. And I think it certainly, my feeling is that development needs to pay for itself. number one. And number two is, as we have, we want to have, and I know, Ryan, you brought this up earlier when we talked, but it was, one of the first things people are saying on this survey is, I want to be able to walk to my retail on BK's Road. And when they say walk, I'm assuming that also means golf carts, because I see more and more of the golf carts around. It may just be where I'm at, but I do see a lot of them. So anyway, I think that's an excellent suggestion, and we can kind of go there. We don't have a terrible amount of time on our meeting, but let me, I think I know what we need to do on the north side of BK's Road, which I'll do. Let me talk, let me change directions a little bit, and let's talk about the rear setbacks on the south side of BK's Road. And I think that we should consider that the rear setbacks on our south side of BK's Road should be equal to whatever the city of Austin setbacks are on their side of the line, because we abut city of Austin on that south side. Now that's going to be a lot less. I tried to look under the city of Austin development code to figure out what the setbacks would be. And yeah, thank you, Wally. You're right. Oh my God. There's a reason that we have a whole cottage industry of very wealthy attorneys that can figure that out. And I wasn't one of them. I'll just tell you, I couldn't figure it out. But to answer you, to what I could figure out is it went from basically 0 if you're in a commercial downtown district to about 25 feet. And most of them, like on general retail, were 5 feet on that. So just something to, and I'd like to address this at our next meeting, and I'll get everybody's thoughts on that. And if I need to do any work on that, I will. But it seems like to me that we shouldn't penalize our commercial properties on the south side of BK's Road any more than the city of Austin does on their side of the line. And I'll kind of open that up for comments if we could.
Let me ask you a question. Do you know the setback where the development is that has Trader Joe's? They've got a retaining wall on the far south edge of the property. How far is the setback there?
I don't know.
That should be your controlling, because that was your most recent development on that side.
Yeah.
And that should be your controlling point safe. That's good enough there that it should be good enough all the way along.
The difference on the Trader Joe's, and I'd have to look at the PUD agreement, but I can tell you that was a PUD, so the setback there was different than what we would have on normal zoning on that.
Tom, what about on Tremont? Because it looks like there are commercial properties that are across Tremont from residential property.
Yes, there are.
So you might, I don't know if we need to look separately at that or not.
My preference, Brooke, and this is just my preference, and we, I would throw this out for consideration. In my opinion, I think that we should have, even though we have neighbors in Tremont and we've been historically very cognizant of their concerns, I think we should assume that if we are zoning a piece of property in Rollingwood commercial, it should have no greater setback than if that piece of property was in the city of Austin on the rear on that. And that's going to put those properties, potentially redevelopment of properties, closer to those residents than currently is there.
Tom, this is Ryan. I want to clarify what you're saying. Tremont, as my understanding, is within Rollingwood. So you don't mean that Tremont's folks would be affected, negatively affected. You're saying that if there's a line between a Rollingwood commercial area and a Austin residential area, that you would impose Austin's setback rather than Rollingwood's. Is that right?
That's correct. The Tremont, there's Tremont subdivision is a big subdivision. Our part of Tremont is 24 houses. Those would get the same consideration as every residential home in Rollingwood. I'm not planning to change that. But let's take Center One, right on the corner. It abuts a residential area of Austin. That one, I would say, if they built back, it would be the Austin setback on that. Or if you took the bank, Prosperity Bank building at Montebello, it abuts a townhouse development of the city of Austin.
Mhm.
And on that one, I would recommend that we use the same setback that the city of Austin would have on our property on that, which could be as little as 5 feet. It all, it's way over my head to be able to tell with all the caveats they have in that building code. But it's anywhere from 5 to 25 feet. And it's based on height, it's based on zoning, and they have about, good Lord, 200 zoning classifications that they have with all the little subcategories that come in on that. So I think we have to try to get, since we have basically 3 commercial zoning, well, C1 and C2 is primarily it. But we have 2 commercial zonings. They have about 200 with all the little caveats that go in there. So me trying to put that on there was pretty difficult, but it's anywhere from, I would tell you that most of our uses that we currently have, or we might put, are going to be anywhere from 5 to 10 feet, as opposed to the 30 or 100 foot that we currently have. Now, I read our current ordinance on green belts as not applying to the south side of BK's Road, because our ordinance reads, and this is just my attempt at being a lawyer, so take that for what it's worth, but our ordinance reads that it is, if you are abutting a residential district, which we have as a zoning classification, and the city of Austin doesn't have those zoning classifications. Now, granted, that's the spirit of the law versus the letter of the law, but in this case, the letter of the law would not indicate to me, and that's just my personal feeling, that we should apply that on the south side of BK's Road. That's just my feeling. But I do believe that we should put, and I've tried to call a couple of attorneys that do this for a living with the city of Austin and just say, okay, we have office buildings and we have general retail. With those type of stipulations, what would be the setback? And try to get as best estimate as I can out of that. I don't have that yet, but just reading the code as I read today, the Austin code, it's somewhere between 5 and 25 feet. Or 0. If we counted our commercials, it could be construed to be our downtown commercial district, BK's Road, then it would be 0 to build to the lot line. Obviously, we have some PUEs back there we couldn't do, but that would open up quite a bit of property that we could have as redevelopment on that, potentially. And I just kind of open that up for just a few minutes of discussion. We don't have a lot of time, but if we think about that, and I'm going to bring that back at our next meeting and try to get that set up, but I'd like for anybody to make a comment if they would would like to. So, any comments?
I think pending finding out what that exact number is, I think that's a wise suggestion and I'd be in support of it.
Thank you, Ron. And understand that we're trying to take a camel and make it into a racehorse, because I'm going to use that example, because they have so many caveats on that it's, we're just going to have to take a stab at it. I'm just making the best stab I can at it to get to that point on that. Any other comments on that? Okay. Then we have, yes.
This is work again. I had one other question about how is the Delana track currently zoned?
Delana track.
I've heard that it's parkland, and I've heard it's, it's the one that's owned by the city of Rolling Wood. I've heard it's parkland. Is it part of the PUD, or it on the map we've been using for zoning purposes, or for talking about these tracks, it's shown as part of the PUD, but I don't know if the PUD designates it as park, or
it's PUD zoning, and the city does own it. It's about 2.5 acres.
But
so
it is part of the PUD.
Yes.
Does that agreement define how it can be used?
Not the PUD agreement, but we have restrictions. I can't remember what the document's called, but we have restrictions on how it can be used. Yes.
Can we get a copy of that?
Sure.
Yeah.
If my memory is correct, it's essentially for recreational use.
Yeah.
And passive recreation. I don't think organized sports are allowed there, but passive recreation.
Recreation.
Passive.
Okay.
A butterfly farm.
It sounds like yoga.
Yeah.
It was an area that just set back. The intent of having that was to allow them to build a little bit taller, but move away from the residents on that. That was the intent that we went through on that.
Okay. And the one other question, what are we going to do with the survey results, the residential, and then when will we get the commercial?
Commercial has closed and we're getting those back. I don't know the status of that, but I will bring you up to date on our next meeting with that. And then we have I have Bowie doing some of their computer wizardry on the commercial survey to give us some deals. Wendy read this and sent out, I don't know, Ryan, did everybody get this? Wendy did a little.
No, I just texted it to you, Tom.
Oh, okay. I'll send out a deal. I've read this and made my notes on all 350 odd surveys, but they have a computer that program that kind of goes through that and highlights everybody's comments so they can put them into a concise deal, which I don't think I will have that. I will have that maybe not by next Monday, but if not, it'll be the Monday after. It's coming up.
Commercial or the residential?
The residential. The commercial,
okay.
we should be getting those back. Friday was the last day that I had asked on those, so we should have those back this following week too. I think that's right, isn't it, Ashley?
I want to say the 24th is the deadline.
24th, yeah. Which today? Okay,
So
they've got one more week.
That would give them the weekend. Yep.
Yeah. So I won't have that. I may have that next Monday, but may not. But I think I will. So.
All right.
All right. I am going to be sending out. I'm going to be getting with Ashley hopefully in the next day or so, and I will send out a proposed list of some new meeting dates. I would like to meet next Monday to just keep this ball rolling the way it's rolling. And I hate to take everybody's time, but I felt like this was productive. And I'd like to meet Monday, and then I'll have a list of possible dates for us to proceed and a schedule to finish this up, if that helps. So, all righty. Any other comments or questions, or do we have anybody? We have some people on the, some residents. If y'all would like to make any comments, please do so. I usually run these as a fairly open meeting, so if you ever want to make a comment, please do at any time, really, at each item as we come up.
Hey, Tom, it's Mo. I have a scope question that I'm sure I should know the answer to, but I don't. Is the athletic club and or the park part of our scope?
Specific.
I bring up the park specifically because, there's the potential plans to put a business there.
Right.
And the athletic club because they're thinking of expanding.
And I'll try to answer this. If I recall, Amber, you can help me with this. As I recall specifically, I was asked, I'm not sure officially, but I was asked not to address park because they just finished the park master plan at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Amber, is that correct?
I would trust what you're remembering. I don't recall.
I saw.
I don't think that's right. They were pretty clear on what they wanted us not to discuss.
Yeah.
And they made those clear at 2 council meetings, and that was not on their list. So
okay.
I think otherwise it was a vision for the city. And
right.
I would think that if we had something that we wanted to talk about in parks, that would be well within the vision for the city that we could. I mean, we're not making the plan. We're making a plan and sending it to council, and then they get to decide to do whatever they want to do with it. They've given us boundaries, and if they don't, if they think that, they can just ignore our comments.
Yeah, and I think mine was a suggestion that they just finished the park master plan and everything, and it may have been, a waste of time. But regardless,
so I bring it up to see if it's appropriate.
I do it anyway.
If it's appropriate for scope, to see how we can fit it in. And it's on top of mind today because actually during this meeting, I had another neighbor come up to our house to ask us about our thoughts. We've had a few neighbors ask us about our thoughts. Right. I think because of our proximity, and they're just they're very friendly. They live on street right behind us anyway. But yeah, I think it would be if it's appropriate for the meeting, then it'd be good to see the agenda at some point.
I had. Actually, I think that's the park is the center of our city, and I just couldn't imagine not doing that anyway. But that's we'll try to get through that too.
And you have a hand from a council member on that.
Oh, Sarah, I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah.
No, that's okay. I just was going to say my recollection is the same as Ryan's. Okay. I don't recall there being any restriction on you guys considering
right.
how we use the park or any commercial enterprise in the park or expansion of the only commercial enterprise we have in the residential area, which is the pool. So I don't think there's any restriction on you guys evaluating that. And I think it would be totally appropriate for you to include that. So.
Very good.
Right.
Well, we plan to. Okay. Mo, does that answer your question?
It sure does.
Excellent. I will put that on the agenda for next Monday, since that's coming up pretty close here, isn't it? So, all right. Any other comments? Hearing none, could I have a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
There we go. We have a second. And without objection, we are adjourned. Thank y'all very much.
Thanks, everybody.
You bet.